Hello, hello, hello. A Friday night live with our hidden gems. And who else has watched the new Hulu documentary Devil in the Family, The Fall of Ruby Franke? Because John and I sure did last night. We watched all 3 episodes. It's a docu-series. And wow, we've been covering this case since the beginning. A never before seen home video. Finally seen Jodie in a trance. For me personally, I don't know about anyone else out there, but that was my wildest moment for me, is actually seeing these alleged trances that we've heard about. And trances, I'll say trance with a quote symbol, because I'll give you a little, I think they're complete manipulation. But we'll ask Dr. John, because we have a psychologist here with us, my co-host, Hidden True Crimes co-host, Dr. John Matthias, a criminal and forensic psychologist. And you have been assessing Jodie Hildebrandt and Ruby Franke from the very beginning, helping us process how this happened, who is who, why this happened. And of course, because of the Franke family, Kevin coming forward, the children, the adult children coming forward. And by adult children, I mean Sherry and Chad. We were able to get a deeper, more inside look on the dynamics going on inside the home when Jodie, before and after Jodie entered their lives. And yes, there were a lot of new snippets. So we're going to get into a lot tonight. But in Hidden True Crime style, we're going to let John choose where he wants to start. I'm going to also be checking out our chat. And if you have a question for us, do a big question mark. I'll try to star it and we'll come back to those. And we just want to dig deep because, like I said, we've got a psychologist with us here tonight. And what I do, and many of you don't know this, we've been doing this since we were dating, because we're not just co-hosts. For those new to Hidden True Crime, we're also married. And John, I'll have to be honest, this is when I knew I was sold on you, was when we were dating.
Sold like I was marketing you. I was marketing myself.
Right.
I guess
with like the checklist that Ruby had. John had a check. Yeah. I had a checklist like Ruby in my closet. We'll get into that. There's a teaser.
Let's clarify. Ruby didn't have a checklist. She had like a spreadsheet with colors, and she had what I call the husband spreadsheet. I mean, color coded.
Yeah.
It was extensive, color coding, and like, I don't know, there were at least, if on the on one axis she had all these qualities. So she had like, I lost count. Like, they didn't show it that long, but she had like 30 plus qualities at least. And then on the horizontal axis, they had different boxes for all the suitors or all the boyfriends that she was dating. There were so many. That's what surprised me. I thought maybe like 3 or 4. No, there were like 20 plus people, suitors, that were interested in her. Like, it was the husband spreadsheet. That was an amazing part of the documentary, and they actually had it somehow. I don't know, Kevin or Ruby, somebody filmed that at some point years ago.
Yeah, I did not have a color coded spreadsheet hanging in my closet when I was dating you, but I had hopes and dreams. But if I had a color coded spreadsheet on it, it would be psychologist, can psychoanalyze criminals with me, can psychoanalyze reality television shows with me, using the pause button and discussing and answering all my questions. And then I would have probably wanted you to have like a British accent, which you don't have, but here we are. It's okay. It's okay. Yeah, I do like that British accent, but it's okay.
You can't get everything on that spreadsheet.
Yeah.
And
I got a Chicago accent. Chicago accent instead.
Even Kevin recognized that there were limitations to the spreadsheet. But this is an interesting part for those who watched it. Kevin found this spreadsheet, this colored spreadsheet, right? And he studied it. He said he took pictures of it. He studied it. He memorized it. He said he worked harder on knowing the spreadsheet than he did at school. And obviously it paid off for him because he ended up marrying her in the year 2000. But how interesting is that? Like, do you want to, if you're going to marry someone, do you try to conform to all the qualities they're looking for? Like that says a lot about Kevin. That Kevin is very malleable and very passive, right? That
Yeah.
and people, that's one question people have been asking me is Kevin brainwashed? One of the arguments for why Kevin wasn't as involved, or when Ruby pushed him out of the home, I've heard from many people saying, well, doesn't Kevin have some culpability? And the answer is, yeah, of course he does. But like, if you look at that spreadsheet, and so many answers lie in that spreadsheet, by the way, you get a better understanding of Kevin. Kevin is someone who he wants to make Ruby happy. He's submissive. He's passive. He's trying to adopt all these qualities in the husband's spreadsheet that he may or may not have, just so that he can win her over. He even says that in the documentary. He says, I forget, he said something like, I had to play dirty, or basically what he says is, I manipulated her into falling in love with me and marrying me to some extent. And so this is someone, he says this in the documentary, this is someone who he wants to stay married. He's submissive. He's going to do whatever he thinks he needs to do to appease Ruby. And I think that goes a long way towards explaining why he didn't stand up or take action, or why he wasn't a little more aggressive in terms of challenging her and challenging Jodie for the kids. And I don't want to put a value judgment on that. For me, there's a part of me that looks at it and says, well, he might be passive, but these are your kids, right? Like, I don't care how submissive you are, how much you want to please Ruby. You need to take a stand here. You need to protect your kids. And I think that's people's argument. That it's more of a moral argument, that no matter how submissive this guy is, from a moral standpoint, he needs to stand up to them and fight for his children. So I think that's where people are really having a hard time with him. But from a psychological standpoint, this is a guy who's very dependent upon her. He's very submissive. He seems like someone who, he even says this, that he tends to be somewhat submissive to more authoritarian figures. Certainly Jodie and maybe Ruby to some extent, at least in that family, would fit that description. So we started with Kevin. I don't know if that was my intention, but like it or not, we started with Kevin.
We started with Kevin. Well, yeah, no, typically I would hope that, if a young man that if saw a spreadsheet like that in a female's closet, he would see that as a giant red flag, where Kevin's like, I got to take a picture and memorize this. Whatever she wants, I will be. It explained Kevin a lot, and it explained Ruby a lot. And you were telling me that was a moment of pausing. You were like, rewind that. Are you kidding? That
was a moment of, I always talk about this idea that sometimes these little things that don't seem that important initially really explain so much. And this is one of those moments in this documentary, this husband spreadsheet that, it's one thing. It's one thing for someone like Ruby or anyone to list some qualities they like in someone, just to kind of remind themselves, I want someone who's kind, right? I want someone who's smart, whatever, it's one thing to kind of have that list and kind of know that list. And I think maybe that's important. It's another thing to have 200 qualities and to start using different color codings, and right, like that, there's an obsessive quality to this spreadsheet. And so I think one thing I took out of that is that if you're trying to understand how this reflects upon Ruby, I think the short answer is that there's something formulaic about that spreadsheet. That this is someone, when you look at that, this is someone who wants easy answers. This is someone who wants a formula that she's gonna put all this data in with all these color codes, and it's gonna spit out this answer. The answer is Kevin, right? Like it's sort of like the joke about I forget the book, The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. There's a question in there about, they ask this computer what's the meaning of life, and the computer takes like 10,000 years to figure out the answer, and the answer is something like, I don't remember, people can correct me on this, the answer is something like 31. Right? That it's a joke, that it's absurd, because the answer to what's the meaning of life is not going to be a number, right? It's but that's how Ruby sees the world, that the spreadsheet is going to spit out the correct answer for who her husband should be. It doesn't have anything to do with intuition or emotion, right? It's all formulaic and it's all clear cut. And I think what I took away from this, with Ruby at least, this is someone who wants the world to be a particular way. This is someone who, and you see this in her YouTube in 8 Passengers. This is someone who wants a very curated, perfectionistic, formulaic, reductive view of the world. And those very qualities you see in that spreadsheet. And trying to pick a husband, she's doing the very thing that she's doing on 8 Passengers. Your mic is off.
Some are saying that that's what they learned to do in their LDS when women's growing up. I certainly recall also being taught to make a list again of all my hopes and dreams. Again, you do not have a British accent. I'm dealing with it. Someone suggested I get you some lessons. But I think going to what you just said, though, the one takeaway as we continue talking about that and rewinding it is, you said it means that Ruby thinks there is a formula for everything, which is, I know what you're saying now, but there are people that want a formula for everything, the right way to do something, that there is a formula and they can fix everything. And she brought up obedience a lot too, and that obedience is love. I think that goes along with wanting a formula. We'll get into that. But yeah, thank you for bringing that up. We'll just start there. That was...
And so even before she's married to Kevin, and even before 8 Passengers, you can start seeing some of these early influences. And that spreadsheet is such a great metaphor for the way Ruby Franke interprets the world, the way she sees the world, the way she acts in the world, the way she is in the world, her expectations for the world, right? Everything in that spreadsheet becomes translated into her YouTube channel. And that's one of the remarkable things about this documentary is you see that playing out behind the scenes. There's moments where she's really frustrated. She gets frustrated with Chad, and she gets frustrated with Sherry a lot. And she'll say to them, there's one moment in the documentary where she says to Chad, fake it. If you're not happy, act happy, smile, act like this is important to you, act right, just fake it.
Mm-hmm. Yes, she did.
She's saying, I want you, Chad, to fit this formula of how the perfect family should work. And by the way, that is something that Kevin talked about a lot, that her ideal, more than anything else, her ideal was to be seen as the perfect mom. This is a quote from Kevin. He said, her ultimate role, quote, her ultimate role is a parent. Her ultimate ambition was to be seen as the perfect mom. And notice too, like, what's interesting about that statement, and again, this is picking up on kind of the minutia here, but this is important, right? What Kevin said, and this, again, the quote is, her goal wasn't to be the perfect mom. He says her goal was to be seen as the perfect mom, to be seen, right? Think about that.
That's interesting.
normally you'd say, my goal is to be the perfect parent. You're not going to say my goal is to be seen as the perfect parent, which, when I, as a psychologist, when I read between the lines, that's an amazing statement, because this idea of being seen in a certain way is often related to shame. Shame is about how you want people to see you. It's about controlling that image you have. And so is narcissism, by the way. So shame, many psychologists would argue, and there's research supporting this, that narcissism is a response to shame. That if shame is feeling vulnerable and imperfect and all the things Ruby's trying to avoid, insecure, right? If shame is imperfection, then the response to that is narcissism. It's a way to cover up that shame, or to repress that shame. That if you can curate this image as being the perfect mom, but you don't feel that way. So this is where I think this is important. I think in many ways, Ruby doesn't feel like the perfect mom. She feels defective in some way. She doesn't. So all of this is about her trying to override that sense of imperfection with something that presents her as more perfect. And hence the YouTube channel. Kevin says that she started the channel because she wasn't getting enough praise and attention. This is a quote again. Quote, she was not getting enough praise and attention for being a mom. So she created a YouTube channel. Because when that's a typical parental response, right? Like when you feel like you're not being good enough as a parent, let's go create a YouTube channel. Let's create a family vlog.
Well, I also want to point out another aspect to that in the LDS faith, being a mother is a beautiful thing that is honored and respected, but you don't get to go to an office every day and get accolades and go to award shows and be a CEO. Much of it is hidden and thankless. And so it was, she wanted an audience to say, look at me. I am the best mom. And she didn't know where to get that. And so she got that on YouTube. Because I think that was part of it too, is, if you're supposed to do this and she's going to be the best and the best mom and the grandest mom, like, who cares? It's thankless. It's a thankless job behind the scenes,
But she
until
needed
there's YouTube.
She needed that to cover this sense of defect or imperfection or vulnerability that she was feeling. Like in the end, that's what she was trying to do. And so, so that's kind of the kernel. That's kind of the foundation that drives this narrative. It drives the narrative all the way to the end, where she gets convicted of felony child abuse. So, if you're thinking about this in terms of like the criminal mind, that's kind of where it starts. Or I could go back further and say that this idea of perfectionism starts in her family, or maybe even several generations before. I don't know, but certainly there's a therapist in this documentary. His name is Brannon Patrick, and he happened to work with Jodie, actually, which is one of the reasons they brought him into the show. But he talks about this idea fairly early on in the first episode. He says that, this is an exact quote, but it's close. He says something to the effect of that people in the communities that Jodie and Ruby are residing in, he says they're happy. They're very happy, right? But he says they're happy, but they're happy, but they're stuck in a box. They're stuck in a bubble. It's a culture of perfectionism, and that people are wanting to look a certain way. They're wanting to be more perfect, because the capital for the Mormon Church is Salt Lake City, and they're striving for perfection in order to advance the highest degree of glory for the church.
That was a very, if it wasn't an exact quote, it was an almost exact quote. He did refer to that. That is what he said at the beginning. He said, I need to be careful what I say.
Right.
And
But
then
I
he
don't
said
think
it.
he was careful enough, by the way. I'm sure he's getting some backlash for that. But I mean,
Well,
part
it's
of
important to say what you say. And in Springville, Utah, unfortunately, because I have wonderful friends from Springville, and it is a beautiful, beautiful place to raise children. But there has been a lot of, crime coming out of there recently with the Frankies there. Chad Daybell is from there, and others. So it was an interesting thing to note. Another thing, though, that you said with that is, oh, I forgot. You said something. I was like, oh, I gotta hit on that. What was it you said? Forgive me, John. What were you saying?
I was just talking about
short-term memory loss, guys. I'm like Dory. I was like, I got something to say, and then I
was just talking about the idea of perfectionism and how it applied to what Kevin was saying, that her goal was to be the perfect mom.
I know what it was. You suggested that you don't know enough about Ruby, and could this go back for generations? I do want to say that we have seen. I will speak for myself, from my opinion on the outside, looking in at all of the Frankie sisters who have put their lives online. Unfortunately, that comes with many of us scrutinizing now that their sister is behind bars, but it certainly does seem like perfectionism runs in the family. I know that I was quite shocked that Bonnie was blanket training, and if anything, it does suggest that they value obedience, which Kevin said as much in this documentary, that to Ruby, obedience was love. Love was obedience. And blanket training does teach babies and young toddlers strict obedience from a very young age. And so I just want to point out that, yes, if we're going to talk about her upbringing and who Ruby Franke is, we do look at the Griffith family a little bit and who they were. In perfectionism and obedience certainly is valued in their household.
And I should say, it's not. I don't want to just pin this on the Mormon Church either. I mean, I'm quoting Brannon Patrick, the therapist, who certainly suggests that Mormon culture is driven by some perfectionist tendencies. It's not, of course, it's not just Mormonism.
No, the
A lot
Duggars
of
did blanket training. The Duggars, I think any strict or high demand religion, and you can have families in a particular religion that create high demand family structures, and people that are in the same religion and don't. So I know what you're saying.
Well, it's not even just religion. It's part of, it's Western culture. If you want to expand it, it's Western culture. It's advertising. It's, how often are we bombarded with advertising that has people with perfect bodies and perfect homes and perfect everything, right? That's the image that it's not just Mormonism. It's the image in Western culture that we're told to follow and believe, and right. And they put that out as an ideal. So it goes much further than, in this particular case. I think Mormonism is in play, but in particular, I think it's in play because the idea of God as kind of the perfect being, right? That idea comes into play not only in not only with Ruby, but with Jodie in particular. So Jodie sees God as this ideal of perfection and moral perfection, and that Jodie, so in that sense, Jodie sees sin as the ultimate worst possible outcome for a human being.
Right.
And so
I want to point out what
yeah.
Sterling Nash says, that obedience would signify breaking someone of their own free will and gaining power over them as well. And I also agree that the judgy comments from the Springville neighbors in the beginning were kind of catty. So that quote that you stated from the therapist was sort of backed up by a bit of the catty comments of the people judging them and saying, well, they weren't friendly and they weren't this. And, so yeah,
that's
with
why
perfectionism, with a belief in perfectionism can come with judgment, a lot more judging, you know?
Well, that's exactly why they brought in when they kept bringing in the neighbors, I kept thinking, why are they in this documentary? They don't really advance the narrative. And the answer is because they're showing you in real time the culture that's creating Ruby Franke, right? Your house, no house is big enough. No car is nice enough, right? You're in a game of status. And, you know, they say in the documentary that everything changed for the Frankies when they started getting these big checks, when they started making more money. And so Kevin acknowledges they sold out. Kevin essentially says that. He said, I would do whatever we had to do to keep these checks coming in.
Right.
And his interpretation of that was that they were representatives for the church or for Christianity, whatever, that he felt like he could justify everything they were doing and all the massive amounts of money they were making and the need to expand their to get better homes and cars or whatever they were doing because they were representing Christianity.
Yeah, he admitted that he was of the belief that what they were doing was okay because he would put it in the perspective of God is blessing us with abundance because we are demonstrating our religion and our faith and our belief in God. And these paychecks that keep rolling up $100,000 a month are our blessings for being missionaries. And he did lay that out. Kevin laid that out, that is why. And they did bring up an example of a Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, a speech that was given saying, be missionaries online, do good online, show goodness and the family goodness that you have and what a good family is online. And so I believe that sort of reaffirmed his position that they were almost being blessed because they were doing the Lord's work.
Yeah. And I think if one thing I kept bringing up to you was this idea of authenticity. It felt like no matter what Ruby said or did, or Kevin to some degree, maybe to a lesser degree, it felt like everything they do was so shallow and so fake, right? Like I never had the sense that Ruby had like what I would call a true self or like an authentic self. Like there was nothing there. It was like she was hollow, and all she did was parrot back. People would say online, "Oh, your family's this, or your family's so beautiful or perfect," and she would feel that way. She would internalize that. And so for me, part of this is the fact that I think that Ruby and Kevin didn't really know who they were and what they wanted and what they valued, right? They I don't think they ever really took a moment of self-reflection or developed any self-knowledge to really figure out what is it you people value. Because if you don't have that, then you're just going to spend your time chasing rainbows or trying to cultivate these images that are completely fabricated and false. And right. And so, and I'm not saying, by the way, it's this idea of cultivating an authentic self is really difficult. And there's some debate about whether that's even possible, but it's certainly possible to cultivate a self that makes sense to someone and that's coherent and has values that we can kind of rely on, or that a person can rely on. There's different conceptions philosophically of what a self is and all that, but so I don't want to get into that too much, but the point is, like, if you really listen to Ruby, there's nobody home. She doesn't ever really say anything that represents a set of values or principles or beliefs. I mean, beliefs maybe later with Jodie, but she's almost like this empty vessel. And I think that's part of the problem here. When you start throwing money and praise and attention at someone like Ruby, she's just going to follow that trail forever.
You did say that throughout the entire documentary. Ruby's just so empty. She's just this empty vessel. Like there's just nothing there. Is that what you meant? Is that what you meant? Is that what you're sharing? Yeah.
I felt I felt some sorrow I felt some empathy and sadness that this person had no capacity for self-reflection and no self-awareness, right? It was just she would make these videos, she'd throw it out to her audience, they would praise her, she would eat it up. It just became this circular feedback loop of praise and behavior and expectations. And the only way she got out of that was when that moment when Chad talked about sleeping on the beanbag chair, right? It was kind of this inadvertent moment.
We have that moment, actually.
Okay.
Can we show that? This jumps into what you want to discuss. This was a moment that changed everything for the 8 passengers YouTube channel.
In our house, when we take something away, it's because they have shown that they are not responsible enough to manage it. And so we don't just turn around and give it back as soon as they start acting good.
It has to be consistent.
It has to be consistent over a minimum of 6 months. And that's showing up consistent in every aspect of their life.
That's a new rule.
That's a new rule. Oh wait, just
a minimum of 6 months.
Have I ever given something back less than 6 months?
I've had my phone taken for like a day.
My bedroom was taken away for 7 months and then you give it back like a couple weeks ago.
I don't think our viewers know that.
You've been sleeping on a beanbag.
I've been sleeping on a beanbag since October. And they gave my room back like 2 weeks ago. Oh, I'll give you the reason why I lost my bedroom. I think so. I think this is the reason. At least this is the reason that's been in my head. It's pretty funny, but now that I look back, I mean, it's pretty depressing.
No, we never told our viewers.
That I woke up at 2 in the morning and told him that we're going to Disneyland and he has to pack. And he got up and made his bed all neatly and then packed all his clothes in a suitcase. And then he walked out the door and I'm like, he was like, what? And he's all happy. Has his sunglasses on. And I was like, we're not going to Disneyland. And he started crying and hitting me. And then he went back to bed in tears and then.
So there you go. That was, according to the documentary, a very pivotal moment in the 8 passengers YouTube channel, because for the first time ever, Ruby started getting more negative feedback than positive feedback. And they felt that they were being canceled. And rather than, Kevin even explained it on this documentary, rather than taking responsibility or realizing maybe we did something wrong or this wasn't right, they felt like the victims, that they had been wrong, that they couldn't think, well, maybe people have a point. Instead, they were the victims, they were being canceled, and this moment started to show who Ruby really was, I think.
So until that moment, this is a fascinating moment to me because it changes everything, at least according to the documentary. I wasn't aware of how big this moment was until we watched this. I knew it started shifting things a little bit. I didn't know that it was catastrophic. According to the documentary, that moment's catastrophic. And so what's fascinating to me about that is, number one, that she says it's kind of an off the cuff comment. She doesn't see it coming, right? And she says our viewers don't know this, and she laughs a little bit, right? Like, in other words, she sees this moment as being harmless because she could have easily edited that out. If she saw that as problematic, she should have taken it out. But she kept it in the video because she didn't see that as being anything that was problematic.
She doubled down.
And so, but But so here's so this goes back to everything I was just talking about the lack being hollow and the lack of self-reflection. She doesn't have the self-awareness to see how a moment like that could change everything. In other words, she doesn't think it's a big deal that she had her kids sleep on a beanbag chair for 7 months. What's the harm? Like, this is just what normal parents do, right? And she doesn't have the capacity or the self-awareness to understand why people would object to that. That's what, more than anything, that's what amazes me about this moment. Like, if she had that awareness, she would have edited it. And even if she didn't, even if she put it out there, it seems to me like the logical, emotional response to a moment like that is to apologize, is to take responsibility and say, we did this, I made a mistake, I've learned from it, this is not how parents should act, right? But she doesn't do any of that. In fact, as you point out, she doubles down and she goes to
Right.
She doubles down, she blames cancel culture, and then she starts moving to this extreme with Jodie Hildebrand. As Kevin describes it, she rejects kind of this happy-go-lucky facade that she's created with 8 passengers, and she starts moving more towards the spiritual existence. It's not like a normal spiritual existence. It's like a punitive, ascetic spiritual existence that's filled with sin and demons, right? It's kind of she starts moving to this dark world. And again, that's because she doesn't have this core set of values to fall back on. If she's in this endless feedback loop so basically the feedback loop goes like this. She films something, and in the message she's trying to get across is, look at how wonderful and perfect and happy we are. Look at what a wonderful, perfect, happy Mormon family we are, and I'm the perfect Mormon mom. And then she puts that video out, and the feedback is, look at how wonderful and happy and perfect you are. We want to be just like you, Ruby. You're wonderful and perfect and happy, right? And now that she gets caught, the narrative starts shifting to, this is all a facade. I can't believe I believed you. You're a horrible parent. And she doesn't know what to do with that. She can't integrate that because there's nobody home. So what does she do? She finds Jodie. She denies it, number one, because she doesn't have any self-awareness and she doesn't have any capacity for self-reflection. She denies it. She blames cancel culture. She finds Jodie because Jodie was just coming to her life around that moment. And then she's so gullible at that point. Jodie starts driving her towards a really dark spiritual place. But as I've said before, let me make this clear. This is not all Jodie. A lot of this, you see, and Sherry Franke does a great job of talking about this. You see that before she meets Jodie, there's these aggressive, even kind of violent moments where when Ruby's narrative of the perfect happy Mormon family is not being met or not being filmed, she's not happy. She's angry. She's aggressive. There's a moment where I don't know which child it was because they blurred the face. She reached out and grabbed the face of one of her kids, like hard, like her mouth. She grabs her mouth and she squeezes it, like, don't talk. Don't say that, right? And with Gabby Petito, I pointed out that, Brian Laundrie did the same thing with Gabby Petito. And I said, when you do that, the next logical step is strangulation. You go.
And I want to point out, you said this before Gabby Petito was found, while the world was still looking. You watched the Moab body cam footage, and I remember you saying that. We just actually re-released that recently. Go ahead, but I wanted to put this in context. You said when you do that. Okay. Go ahead.
It's a similar behavior. It's not only is she physically, literally and physically shutting down speech by closing her child's mouth, but she's sending the message like, I I can control the oxygen going into your body, which is exactly what strangulation is. If you move your hand down 3 inches, you're on someone's neck. It's the same behavior, right? Like it's not inconceivable. I mean, obviously, thankfully, this was stopped before it went too far, but it's not inconceivable that one of these kids could have easily been hurt in that manner. Because the next logical step would have or could have been they bound these kids.
Yeah.
Right. The next logical step would have been something like strangulation.
Yeah. Yeah. So Ruby had this absolute need for control, this absolute need for power, this absolute need for perfection, and this absolute need for attention and to be seen. This is starting to get very toxic, to say the least. We're seeing things hit a pinpoint where someone could become a criminal. And so when things start to go south and she's not getting the attention she craves, how does Jodie come into this? How does Ruby all of a sudden decide that she's going to be this extra spiritual person? I mean, according to the documentary, they said that it was after this that she was seeking something more. But how did you see that?
I think at the moment that Jodie enters her life, especially after the beanbag incident, Ruby's particularly vulnerable. And I think in that moment, she's looking for answers. She's looking for direction. And as I said, she's sort of this empty vessel that really doesn't know what to do. So if that moment doesn't happen, she probably just keeps on the same course. But given that moment and the kind of the collapse of their channel because of that moment, that people started seeing through the facade and the masks, Jodie is kind of the perfect person to pick up the baton or to pick up the wreckage. In the sense that I think Jodie sensed that Ruby was vulnerable, that she was reeling from that incident, that her channel was falling apart. And I think Jodie perceived an opportunity to take Ruby's audience and to essentially to appropriate or steal, however to take Ruby's audience for her own. And Jodie was at that point trying to grow her own cult of sorts, connections, right? And what better way to do that than to have an audience of 2.5, 3 million people that are just being handed to you.
Yeah. Right.
And so by controlling Ruby, obviously I think it's obviously hugely self-interested, but she's controlling her own capacity to build her own empire and her own channel. And she sees doing that. She's using Ruby as a vehicle to accomplish that goal.
Cosmetically forsaken makes a great point. I'm going to bring this up. And by the way, let's segue really quickly. I know there are some other things you probably want to talk about. We're getting some great comments. So how would you like to do the rest of this show? Should I ask questions or do you have some more things you'd really like to say or together? Because we are getting some great questions too.
Yeah, we can. I think those are the main points I think I wanted to cover up front. I can't stress, I can't stress enough how important this idea of perfectionism is here. It's perfectionism without any foundation to support it. It's a perfectionism that right. If you lack a self or a true self or whatever, authentic self,
which I believe Ruby did, yes,
then you have very little to build upon. And this idea of perfectionism, I think, becomes particularly troubling in those circumstances because you're chasing you're chasing illusions, you're chasing rainbows. Like, you don't really know it, she's defining perfectionism in the context of the church, but I don't think she really understands what that means. And so, I think this is where she gets lost.
Yeah. Thank you. Cosmically Forsaken is asking that they're talking about a huge connection between Ruby and Lori, and they are referring to Lori Vallow Daybell. Now officially Lori Daybell. Did you know that? By the way, she has finally accomplished getting the Arizona courts to call her Lori Daybell. She is married to Chad Daybell still, who is also behind bars, and they are accused, not accused anymore. They are convicted murderers. They murdered Lori Vallow's 2 children, JJ and Tylee, which I believe was going to be the same fate as E and R. In fact, the police officer in Santa Clara, Utah, said the exact same thing, that there's no doubt in her mind, had R not escaped, that would have been E and R's fate. So there's a huge connection between R and Lori. They both wanted to be special and important. They are found leaders who fed into that. I'm going to share a couple other things, though, before you answer this, because we need to talk about the parallels in this so much so, because we haven't not talked about, I did just say that Jodie's book is You Are Not Enough. So we have talked about this a lot, about how this is essentially a copycat crime, or a, Lori Vallow 2.0 crime. And this documentary, to me, shook me to the core in a way that I thought, not only is this like a Chad Daybell, Lori Vallow 2.0, but it almost feels as if Jodie was following the case and literally copying it. Because let me share a few things we learned. And some of you have asked these questions too. I've started these questions. Jeannie Marie says, what about the demonic thing going on? What do you make of that? What about Jodie's breakdown? What is your take? So we know that there was a trance that Jodie that happened, and we saw the trance where she was saying that there was a demonic possession inside of her, and then they did these castings to try to get rid of it, and then she got rid of Kevin. I don't know. So there's that. Then she refers to the kids as zombies at one point, and people are bringing that up too. They're saying it was shocking. Actually, Jeannie, that was you too, when she referred to her children as zombies. And then I do believe that these children, because of Jodie, were on their way to being killed. That was next. And we just have to talk about this. It blew my mind. Like, to me, there's no doubt this is absolutely the Lori Vallow, Chad Daybell case 2.0. But to explain for those that haven't followed the Daybell cases clearly, Chad Daybell would be Jodie Hildebrandt, and Ruby would be Lori. So can we talk about this? Because
Yeah. Yeah, there's so many parallels. I mean, last night when we were talking about it, you actually believed that it was possible that Jodie was influenced by Chad Daybell, that Jodie took elements of the Daybell case and refined them and put them into practice with connections and with Ruby.
yes,
No,
I
don't
really
know.
do think that now. I almost feel like Jodie was inspired by Chad Daybell. They were preppers. They were prepping for the apocalypse. They both read Visions of Glory. Yeah, I know.
Which I mean, we don't have any direct evidence of that. I think that the commonality is that Chad Daybell was this aspiring author that was starting to get some measure of attention. And I don't want to say fame. I got maybe a little bit of fame in Mormon circles for his books. His books started becoming much more popular. Certainly by the time that he and Lori committed the crimes. And Jodie Jodie started Connections, and she was growing quite a following, and she had this YouTube channel that was starting to get attention, like Chad. I think there were some parallels. They were both, you can't really say they were aspiring cult leaders, because I don't think they would see it that way, but they were aspiring celebrities or pseudo celebrities. That's how they saw themselves. And so I think there is that commonality. They're both driven by similar issues.
Mm-hmm. Yes. They definitely were driven by similar issues. It was shocking. One question we've always asked in the Lori Vallow, Chad Daybell case is, who was the ringleader? Lori too. There were problems with Lori before she met Chad, clearly, to say the least. But Beth asks, who does Jen think is more influential, or who was the more culpable person, Ruby or Jodie?
This is Jodie's cult, just like it was Chad Daybell's cult. I think without Jodie and if we're making the analogy with Daybell, without Chad Daybell, I believe the kids are still alive. Without Jodie, these kids are probably not going to be abused at the level that they were. I mean, there were already, before Jodie, there were already hints of abuse. As I mentioned, like the grabbing the mouth, I mean, Ruby's definitely culpable. And if, for those who saw Ruby's sentencing hearing, Ruby basically argued that Jodie was a monster that influenced her and she had nothing to do with it, that she blamed it all on Jodie. And that's not accurate either. The Jodie definitely had sort of this, with Ruby, that Jodie enabled Ruby's worst tendencies.
Yeah. Dr. John, why does control obedience equate to love? I want to say, I don't think it does, but according to Ruby, it does.
I think she's using the love in a particular context, that she's basically saying that that she considers love to be following orders and following her directives. In other words, love is pleasing her. And so in that sense, I think that's why she equates obedience with love, because if you defy her, then you're not showing the appropriate amount of respect or love.
Becky asks Dr. John, what does Ruby's commitment to obedience say about her own childhood?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know a huge amount of details about her childhood, but I would speculate that, again, I talked briefly at the beginning about possible, intergenerational transmission of parenting practices or maybe trauma. I don't know the details, but certainly you'd have to think that Ruby probably grew up in a family culture that was fairly strict, and there was kind of an underlying disciplinary stance in her family. So I don't know for sure. We have talked about, I have talked about the idea that there doesn't seem to be a huge amount of empathy. If you look at some of the other YouTube channels that Ruby's sisters have done, right there, we've talked about this before. I don't think I'm going to mention names here, but one of the sisters, after the whole Ruby story broke, one of the sisters basically came on and said, Ruby doesn't have anything to do with us, right? Like, I don't want this to affect our channel. Basically, she came on and said that some stuff that was very self-serving.
We actually have Lori Vallow's son with us now. I want to know. Colby, it's good to see you. He said he just hopped on to show us both some love.
Thanks, Colby.
And never fun to realize two YouTubers are sitting here discussing your mom and how she compares to Ruby Franke. So we're sorry, Colby, and we admire you and how far you've come. And for those that are following this and haven't been following Colby, check out his channel. He talks a lot about what he's dealing with and how he's trying to heal and figure out what in the world happened in his life. So thank you for showing that love, Colby, and being here. Thank you.
So I can infer, I don't know for sure, but I would guess that Ruby's family of origin probably stressed obedience. They probably stressed discipline, right? Many of the things that Ruby is reenacting with her kids. That would be my guess.
Yeah. Yeah. People are asking if Colby sees any similarities. I don't know, but I will say this. Sherry did. Sherry Franke, I read her book, and she has a whole section where she watched the Netflix documentary, Sins of Our Mother, which actually has both Colby and John in the documentary. And
well,
Sherry,
let's stress that I'm in a much more minor role than Colby. So let's give the shout out here to Colby.
Yes. It was a documentary that highlighted Colby and his healing journey and what happened to his family. But in that show, and John, you played a part in it as well. In that show, that is how you and Colby met.
Yeah.
Sherry Franke watched that and she couldn't believe it. And there was a whole section in her book about how she thought, oh my gosh, this is my family. My mom has adopted the exact same beliefs. I read this over on Mormon Stories, a section of the book. And so it certainly needs to, this needs to be discussed and processed because, after watching this documentary, I started to actually feel like Jodie was influenced by Chad, that she thought, because I'm going to say it. And I want to ask you, did you think her trance was real in any amount, or was it manipulation?
So this is the way I would describe the trance. I think her trance was what I would call a self-induced hypnotic state, meaning that there was no demon, there was no possession. If you look at, they don't show a lot of the video of the trance, the so-called trance. So was it a trance of sorts? I guess, but it was self-induced. You can self-induce. So it would be like a snake handler that starts speaking in tongues, right? You hand someone a snake in the Baptist church. And I know this, by the way, because my grandfather was a snake handler. I never went to see him do that, but he talked about it, not much. I think even he thought it was strange. Yeah, I know, right? So, but he talked about, the people that would handle the snakes they would go into these trances and they would speak in tongues. And, one of the tells with Jodie's so-called trance is that when she's supposedly speaking in tongues, she's speaking perfect English.
Right? She's mine.
Go watch for those who haven't seen, go watch this trance and tell me if this is supposed to be speaking in tongues and speaking like, I don't know.
Okay, I want to do a poll. I want to do a poll in chat. If someone knows how to do it, well, maybe you can't do it through our streaming service. Maybe you have to go over on YouTube and do it. But I want to do a poll if one of our moderators is able to, and ask, do you believe that the trance of Jodie's you saw was 100% manipulation, or did you think there was something to it? And I want to bring up too that we had heard about, this is another question for you, John. So another question I'm asking people, like, what about Kevin saying that he's seeing things being thrown back and forth? And then he has a picture of a handprint on a mirror. And they're like, do you have the picture? He's like, yeah, here it is. And we see it. And I was like, I'll have to be honest. I was like,
It wasn't. First of all, yeah, right. I love that the documentary guy says, "Do you have a picture of the handprint?" And he's like, "Yeah, here it is." That's not a handprint.
He's like, got it right
That was
here.
like
Like,
that's what I would call a smudge. Like that was like somebody cleaning the window that like missed a spot or like put their hand there by accident. Like that was not a handprint left by the devil.
yeah.
It didn't even
Yeah.
look like a hand. I mean, so to answer your question, why does Kevin think all this stuff? Belief. He wants to believe it.
He wants to believe it. There you go. He wants to believe it, or else he goes
Confirmation
crazy.
bias.
He actually
wants
said
to
that.
believe it.
He wants to believe it. That was a moment in the documentary too, was what he said. The facts that I was seeing in front of my eyes did not equate to what I believed in my brain. And he was refusing to see it. And so you make a valid point. He wanted to believe it because he was in this cult. He was in. If it wasn't, it's like this denial mechanism. So yeah, he wanted to believe it. And by the way, I learned after saying hello to Colby that he's actually already done a video about this. So for those wondering if Colby sees the similarities, head to his channel. He'll answer you there. But you're right. He wanted to believe it. And that's just like Lori wanted to believe it. And Ruby wanted to believe it. And Chad, well, that's another story. We'll get into that later. But
there's a quote I often reference. There's a guy, he's now deceased, but the brilliant social psychologist who used to teach at Harvard. His name's Carl Weick. Carl Weick was fond of saying that, that the usual cliche is seeing as believing, right? That you get evidence, you evaluate it, and you formulate beliefs on that, right? Carl Weick used to always say, no, that's all wrong. The way it should be with human beings is believing is seen. Human beings, we adopt beliefs, and then we see evidence, or we see the world based on those beliefs. I love Carl Weick's statement because for the most part, I think there's a lot of truth to that. So that's not to say that there are people that evaluate evidence and change their beliefs accordingly, but it's not easy to do that. And so this is a case of believing is seen. He's all in on the cult. He believes in Jodie's authenticity. He believes in this idea of demonic possession. So he's seen this handprint that he thinks is a devil. He's hearing noises that are supposedly demons or ghosts. It's all that.
thank you, Susie. And thank you to the many people also that have gifted memberships tonight. So many generous people. Thank you so much. McSpunky, as well as there were a few others. Yeah. So
I saw McSpunky did that. Thank you, McSpunky. Good to see you.
Destiny, thank you so much. There have been so many kind people donating or gifting Hidden True Crime memberships so we can all be gems. Thank you so much, Share Bear. And there were many others. Forgive me. I agree. It was a wide open documentary. Emily, thank you.
I'm going to go back. Let's go back to this trance situation because it's so important.
Okay, please. I could talk about the trance forever. I was like, oh my gosh. That was like the thing where it's like, I've been wanting to see that. I was like, show me Jodie's trance. And I was like, you've got to be kidding me. This is it. So
I was like, look, my grandpa was a snake handler. She's not speaking in tongues. That's not real. So,
yeah. By the way, 98% think it was all a manipulation. 98% of our gems think it was all a manipulation.
That's the key to understanding that trance. That's the key, because this is a moment in this story. This is a moment when Jodie senses that Ruby is vulnerable and Jodie wants to hijack Ruby's life completely. And in order to do that, she has to get Kevin out of her life, and she has to get some of the kids out of her life. And she does. That's exactly by going into this trance. And by the way, she also she also creates this inversion of roles, this shift in roles where Jodie is supposedly the therapist, and then Ruby becomes the therapist. So, I mean, anybody, since I'm a licensed psychologist, like I think any licensed mental health professional will tell you that's a massive red flag. Like if the therapist is acting sick or possessed, in order to have their client now become the therapist and to supposedly heal them or whatever she was doing, not only is that unethical, that's like the ultimate manipulation, right? And so by inverting those roles, what's going on is Jodie is trying to take control of everything in Ruby's life. She's trying to take control of her YouTube channel. She's trying to take control of her personal relationships, her romantic relationships, her children. This trance is the beginning of that process of hijacking Ruby's life. And which by the way, she does it. She's successful. She gets Kevin kicked out of the house, and Ruby moves in with Jodie.
Right. To her bedroom.
She gets the two older children to leave. So the younger minors stay, but the two older children, Sherry and Chad, leave. Right? She gets Ruby to show up on her YouTube channel every day. I mean, it all begins with that trance.
She gives her YouTube channel. She hands it over. Mom's the truth.
She hands it over. Mom's for truth.
She gives it.
Mom's for truth.
This was our entire livelihood for years and years and years. And here you go. Take it. Mom's the truth. That's all you got to know. Kara is asking, by the way, thank you so much, Kara, if Colby thinks that his mom would have gotten involved with connections in Jodie's teachings. I love that. If Colby's here, he can answer, or maybe he already has. Don't know. But if he's not here, I'm going to answer for him and say, yeah. Except Lori might have even gotten like Jodie out of her place. She'd be like, guys, Jodie's old news. Like, it's my turn now. Here we go. She would have been the head of connections. A couple other questions. We only have, Kresha. Kresha's here. Kresha, thank you for being here. We're so sorry about your family's loss. Thank you, Kresha. I just see someone saying that you're here. I'm not seeing all the comments, so forgive me, everyone. I have a couple more questions. I'm picking these. You guys, there's so many good ones. I've starred so many, but I'll just go through. What is up with refusing children food anyway? I kind of agree with that. Like, what's up with that? Like, is it like, why that? Just something they need to survive and control?
Yeah, definitely control. I mean, yeah, that's an interesting question. I think there can be a lot of different levels to that, to answering that question. But I think my immediate response would be that for most kids, food is the one thing they can control. So as someone who has worked with a lot of therapists that have worked with eating disorders, I haven't really done much with eating disorders, by the way, but I've been in agencies where I've worked with therapists that were really excellent with eating disorders. And that's the one commonality they would talk about, that a lot of times children with eating disorders they might be in abusive and traumatic homes, and or at the very least dysfunctional homes, and food is part of the process of having a voice, of controlling what's going on. So kids can control what they put in their mouth. Even if you force a child to eat, they can still to some degree decide whether they're going to eat it. And so in some ways, taking away food is like the ultimate form of control, because now you're taking away you're taking away any capacity for that child to make a decision or to choose. They can't even choose whether they're going to eat. So you're literally stripping it. It would be, think of it as
No, it makes sense. Children rely on adults to take care of them, except for when it comes to eating. This is something they can do themselves. And so you're taking away the one thing that they can do themselves to take care of themselves.
it's very cultish in that sense.
Yeah. Krispy Kreme is asking, or Crispy Treat, excuse me, although they're both delicious. But Kevin is saying that there were things flying around the room. How do you explain that? Again, he wanted to believe it. Same.
Yeah. Well, first of all, there weren't things flying around the room. That was his imagination. I mean, it's sort of like when if you're going to go into, let's say you're going to go into a haunted house for Halloween, right? The best thing the haunted house can do is kind of market how scary it is and how things are going to be flying around in the haunted house, and it's going to be this otherworld experience, right? It's a lot of it's marketing. If you get people to believe that when they step into a haunted house that all these paranormal things will happen, they're much more likely to see those things. And I think so Kevin was primed. He had this set of beliefs, he developed these expectations that Jodie had these paranormal powers. And so I think that's what he wanted to see. Whether he actually saw that, it's interesting in the documentary, he doesn't talk about the flying dishes. He talks about the noise in the basement, and he talks about the handprint, but he doesn't bring up the dishes flying around the kitchen, like apparently the dishes flying out of the cabinets or whatever. I mean,
Picks or it didn't happen, Kevin. Picks or it didn't happen. I want to see. You've got pics of the handprint. I need to see the dishes flying.
Since
Eve
my
is
preference,
asking, is it fair to assume that narcissists are susceptible to adopting extreme and problematic ideologies due to their need for validation? Or I might just ask, why in the world is every cult leader a narcissist? Is I think a great thing to ask.
It depends on the narcissist. So there's probably a wide array of narcissists. And yes, if a narcissist wants to run a cult and take control of people's lives, it probably benefits them to adopt extreme beliefs, because that way they can weed out people that have less extreme beliefs, and they can focus only on the people with extreme beliefs. So I think it really depends on the narcissist. Some narcissists are psychopaths, are purely transactional. They don't really care about the beliefs. They just care about getting what they can, and whether that's money, whether that's attention, whatever it is. So it depends. It depends on the needs. It depends on the context and the needs of the narcissist.
Yeah. Yeah. I like that. Zero saying if Jodie can stage prophecy, why not stage dish throwing?
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, we live in Vegas, so we maybe Jodie was set up some type of like Penn and Teller or Chris Angel type, illusions, or David Copperfield. I don't know. Right? Maybe she had something in her cabinets that pushed the dishes out. Anything's possible. It seems like that would be an elaborate
Paige Hannah
ruse.
was behind the kitchen island going, she was like, I got this. Sorry. Okay. Bad joke. Let's talk about this. And we actually have to sign off. John and I are actually signing off to go be guests on Banfield on News Nation. Right after this, we're going to sign off and jump on with Ashley Banfield, so you can come join us there. We are going to continue talking about this documentary, this Hulu documentary that came out, Devil in the Family, The Fall of Ruby Franke, over on Ashley Banfield. So come watch us there. But I'll end with Christina Beck is asking, why didn't Kevin get custody of the younger children? We do know now that the children now are back in his custody. We learned this. We actually put out a video yesterday, and one of our moderators, if you want to share a link to that, it's also in our playlist. But yesterday, the youngest victim, that found at Jodie Hildebrandt's house has actually spoken out to Utah legislatures, and we have her message and what she shared this week, or was it last week? Just days ago. And we did learn that they are now back in Kevin Franke's care. And then I also want to share that John and I were featured at the Columbia Journalism Review, a paper we both have loved and admired for so long. We're so grateful and excited about it. And I'll post a link. I think we posted a link on our, here it is. I'll share it here. We were featured right here. Here we go. We were featured with fellow YouTuber Emily Baker. So that was fun for us. Yeah. And what else? We posted a Patreon episode yesterday as well. We do exclusive weekly episodes on Patreon. We've been doing it all of 2025. I'm really proud of us. John, you're looking down, but I just want you to know, way to go us. Every week we have had exclusive episodes over on patreon.com/intocrime. And this last week we discussed Delphi, Indiana, and the case of Abby and Libby yet again. So a little behind the scenes. Thank you, everyone. Anything else you would like to say?
Yes. Just a couple of quick thoughts to end here. I always try to wrap something up with episodes up with some food for thought. So, or maybe I should say lack of food. No, I shouldn't say that because
Yeah, bad joke. Sorry. Bad joke.
Just I just want to point out that this whole idea of this quest for perfectionism is it's a losing battle. I mean, it leads to so many blind alleys, not least of which I think is just this narcissistic self-focused. When you're so focused on the perfect, you really, I think, tend to lose sight. You create this fictional world like Ruby did, and I think you really lose sight of the real world. You lose sight of what is inevitably, in my mind, an imperfect world, and I live in an imperfect world. So I think it's important, or I try to anyway. It's important to recognize that this constant quest for perfectionism, like Jodie and Ruby undertook, is kind of a losing battle. And so I think that wasn't going to have a good outcome. And then my second thought is, one of my favorite quotes is Socrates, the unexamined life is a life not worth living. And what he meant essentially was, if you don't reflect on your life, if you don't think about your life, it's really hard to know who you are and what you stand for and what your values are and what your principles are. And I think that both Jodie and Ruby are like quintessential examples of human beings who led unexamined lives, and that's part of the tragedy here too. If you don't examine your life, you can really end up going down a malicious or destructive path, and that's what happened here. So just a couple of final thoughts. Your mic.
Thanks so much, everyone. Banfield starting in 5 minutes. We're going to sign off, and it is television, so no link, but we'll be over there. Thanks, everyone, and have a great
night.
Night.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night.